do UFOs have occult or demonic origins? But the idea of actually digging into the whole story from a governmental perspective, you're quite right. It isn't something, I never really anticipated getting into at all.
Were you reluctant to go this way? I see you at occasional UFO conferences. Yeah. You're always so erudite and careful about your research and everything. And it would seem to me that if you were to tell your colleagues, hey, I'm researching whether UFOs are demonic. Well, let's explore that for a second, because it sort of becomes an underlying theme in the book, is that the possibility that these agents and this agency that was investigating this stuff had somehow tried to establish communication, had opened some sort of a door, a portal, a window, and that things came in and that shouldn't have come in. Why don't you talk about that in an overall sense, and then we'll get into some specifics.
Yeah, sure. This was basically the idea that, rather than sort of nuts and bolts spacecraft landing, as we said, on the White House lawn, the idea was that people, literally within the Defense Department, were sort of consulting ancient texts and books on demonology and using archaic rites and rituals to quite literally summon up these entities that, the UFO research community calls the Greys. They weren't trying to contact them by radio or whatever, radio waves or anything like that. It was literally, invoking and using ancient rites and rituals. And the story was, that they didn't necessarily come through in nuts and bolts craft. The group actually came to believe over time that, this was more of like a hologram type thing, that these weren't sort of flesh and blood entities. They were almost like a demonic intelligence, if you like, that in some cases weren't even sort of, had physical form, although they could manifest physically in some respects, that the group believed. So in other words, the idea was that this portal was opened. Now, by portal, in simplistic terms, we're talking about a gateway to another realm that some people would quite possibly correctly, would suggest was like another dimension. But the group concluded it was literally like a doorway or portal to hell, and allowed these entities to come through in like a deceptive mode of extraterrestrials. And then it was a case of, well, we can actually learn quite a bit if we can harness their powers. But should we try it? Can we actually take on the forces of hell in some sort of Faustian pact? That was literally the way it was looked at. But again, based on belief systems, one man's alien is another man's demon. That is the sort of the basic background as to how and why they were looking at this. It was a case of trying to contact these entities, open doorways, and then try and militarize any powers or skills that might be developed from liaising with these entities.
Now, Ray, your friend Ray, Anglican priest that he is, said that there is some sort of a focus on Christianity as opposed to other kinds of religion from whoever these entities are. Why don't you go explain that to us?
Yeah, well, Ray's done a lot of research into this area, and certainly, this is one of the things that why there was so much research done for the book. It covered 4 years, because I'll be the first to admit, I'm not a particularly religious person. I don't have any problem with what people believe at a religious level, but, not being someone who sort of has that background, it required a lot of research. And so, that's why the interviews were quite extensive for the book. And Ray basically has done a lot of research and found a number of cases where these sort of so-called alien entities, whatever they are, had made denials about Christianity when they were speaking to, various abductees, contactees, whoever, and claiming, that Christianity isn't really the truth behind what's going on. And what Ray found was that in a number of cases it was always Christianity that was targeted rather than any other religions. It was always that one that was being criticized, and Ray kind of perceived it as being as he saw it, sort of the two true forces, good and evil, the Christian belief system, and, the minions of Satan squaring up against each other. And he felt that the denial of Christianity by these entities was evidence that they're probably not extraterrestrial, because they were focusing on just one religion.
Okay, we're getting into the good stuff now with Nick Redfern, talking about a secret government group that was studying demons disguised as ETs.
They came across a very disturbing story of a man named Paul Garrett. Now, Paul Garrett was a guy who was involved in a car accident in the late 1960s in California and had a near-death experience. And he actually wrote to his local newspaper, and I've got the clipping from the newspaper, and he's basically, a letter to the editor talking about this amazing experience he'd had this accident, and literally, I guess, died, but he was brought back on the operating table and had one of these classic near-death experiences that people talk about. He said he could see himself leaving his body and floating above himself in the operating room. Next thing he knew, he said, I guess his essence, his soul, however you want to term it, was on this, what looked like a totally alien world, and which he literally interpreted to be hell. But he said it wasn't like a hell that he'd ever seen before. It was like a flat landscape, almost how you'd imagine an alien planet might look. And it got kind of disturbing because he said there were just, thousands and thousands of shuffling human beings kind of shuffling around like zombies out of some, a zombie film. And there were these UFO-like craft hovering over them, moving very, very quickly in a fashion that sort of reminded him of like worker bees or fast-moving insects. And they seemed to be extracting some sort of light, like a ball of light, out of the bodies of the people, which he interpreted that these were sort of almost like machine entities, I guess almost like techno-demons extracting human souls from the recently departed. And this story got back to the Collins elite because somebody apparently read it in the newspaper, and the story got back to the intelligence world and onto the Collins elite. And they uncovered a number of stories like this and eventually came to the conclusion that the whole purpose of why this was demonic was because they came to believe that the human soul possesses some sort of energy or is formed of some form of energy which these entities actually can use as sustenance in simplistic terms. In other words, they're harvesting human souls.
When I read that chapter, when I read that part of the book, I thought, wow, that rings a bell with me because I had the Lazar story. I'd interviewed Bob Lazar, Area 51, and Bob was reluctant to get into this stuff, but he said somewhere along the line he read a report that talked about the harvesting of souls.
Hello, Art.
Yes.
Hi. I don't have a whole lot of time.
Well, look, let's begin by finding out whether you're using this line properly or not.
Area 51.
Yeah, that's right. Were you an employee or are you now?
A former employee.
Former employee.
I was let go on a medical discharge about a week ago, and I've kind of been running across the country. Oh man, I don't know where to start. They're gonna they'll triangulate on this position really, really soon.
So you can't spend a lot of time on the phone. So give us something quick.
Okay. Okay. What we're thinking of as aliens are they're extra-dimensional beings that an earlier precursor of the space program made contact with. They are not what they claim to be. They have infiltrated a lot of aspects of the military establishment, particularly the Area 51. The disasters that are coming, the military, I'm sorry, the government knows about them, and there's a lot of safe areas in this world that they could begin moving the population to now, Art.
But they're not doing anything.
They are not. They want the major population centers wiped out so that the few that are left will be more easily controllable.
Discharge.